Hello and welcome to Cymera, Britain's only book festival celebrating science fiction, fantasy and horror writing. My name is Anne Landman and I'm the festival's founder and artistic director. Right about now, I'd hope to be welcoming you to beautiful Edinburgh, to our venue The Pleasance, for a weekend packed with events. Writing workshop, panels, readings, open mics, a quiz, a ceilidh, 2 plays. We had so much in store for you. Thank you for joining us online instead, to be part of our programme from the safety of your homes. We're very excited to still bring you a fantastic lineup of speakers. We'd ask you that you support our speakers, and there's many ways you can do that. You can buy their books or borrow them from the library. You can donate to them directly via their Patreon or Ko-fi. You will find the links for that below in the description. We encourage you to buy a ticket for our events, even the pre-recorded ones. All ticket money will go directly to our speakers. You can also donate to the festival, and all donations via the donation page will be split between our speakers, once we've covered our costs like the Zoom account. Thank you again for joining us in this brave new world of digital events. We hope you have a chance to check out all 33 of ours over the weekend. Please let us know what you think of them. Do get in touch via social media, the chat function in Zoom, or drop us an email on info@chymerafestival.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you in person next year for Cymera 2021.
Welcome, Nick, and welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here to chat about your work.
Hi. Pleasure always.
And how are we doing in lockdown life? How's it going, Nick, for you?
I'm having an embarrassingly nice time, actually. It's strange, actually, because I took a year off this year to do some writing. I've been a teacher for the last decade or so, but I took a year off, and actually about 2 months before lockdown started, I was basically under self-imposed lockdown to try and finish a book, and I was on a farm in Canada, like, haven't really spoken to anyone. So this is, by comparison, like 100% more sociable than
that. Yeah, and Chris, people say, do they not, that for an author, lockdown life isn't really that different? But has it been different for you?
In some respects, it's been much the same, because the way I do my job is to not just to sit at a computer, but I need to go walking. The problem was, during the early part of lockdown, being asked to just walk once a day. That was I was trying to get my timing right. Make sure I was a part of the process where I could maximise the impact of going for a walk. So, and also I think that there's the uncertainty over various things is not good for creativity. Someone said it's like a bit like, knowing that the wolves are circling you. You can't entirely take your mind off the wolves in order to get on with the day job. So in some respects, it doesn't change, and it's also, having a book to get on with is a very good way of passing the time. Of feeling you've got a purpose to what you're doing.
Lovely. Thank you for your thoughts there on lockdown life. I think people are in the room and settled down. So just to say, welcome again. My name is Jackie Collins, and I'm the director of Newcastle Noir. But I've sort of interloped for this, and to be part of such an exciting festival that Cymera is. If you haven't read the blurb about the panel, let me just read it to you. It says, "Have you ever dreamed about leaving the real world for good and immersing yourself in a different reality?" And I wonder if, again, during this lockdown life, we've actually been thinking, if only we could do that. But a different reality, or even a game. So in the books, Nick Bowling, Alpha and Omega, which we're going to talk about this evening, and Chris Brookmyre's Bedlam, and Pandemonium as well, I think. But in these 2 books, we have Gabriel Backer and Ross Baker, who are trapped in the surreal worlds of video games. And when the real, the unreal, and the surreal are indistinguishable, the truth is difficult to recognize, and a way out seems impossible. we promise we'll let you out at the end of this panel, obviously, despite whatever worlds we might slip into. If you're unfamiliar with Nick, just let me give you a few facts about him. An author and a stand-up comic, musician and Latin teacher from London. I love the fusion of all those aspects. So he graduated from Oxford University with a BA in Classics in English, and again with a Master's in Greek and Latin language and literature, before moving to a teaching job at Trinity School in Croydon. His writing debut novel was Witchborn. He has also performed a solo show at the Edinburgh Festival, and co-written, recorded and released an album and 2 EPs with soul folk singer Mary Erskine. Now, his second novel, In the Shadow of Heroes, was shortlisted for the Costa Children's Book Award in 2019. But you've moved into adult fiction, have you not, Nick, with Alpha Omega? And my initial question, just to say, is why that shift?
It's not really a shift. I mean, it's been simmering away pretty much the whole time whilst I was writing the 2 children's books for now. And it is quite strange. I find it, I was saying this in the other seminar, that I find it so existentially quite troubling. The fact that my children's books are quite, I mean, I suppose there's a darkness to them in places, but generally they're quite buoyant and sort of hopeful and strongly sort of narrative driven, whereas Alpha Omega is, yes, much darker, and it has a slightly less positive outlook on the world. But yeah, it's, I mean, I used to, as you said when you're reading my bio, like I've done bits and bobs of sort of comedy, and I'd say there is a satirical element to Alpha Omega. So I suppose it's a bit of a fusion of comic stuff that I've written in the past, and then more novelistic things that I've been writing for children. So. But yeah, it hasn't been a definite decision to move away from children.
That shift.
It's been something I've been writing for about 5 years.
I do like the sound of the darkness. It pleases me tremendously. I like that. I'll be back with you in a minute.
In there as well.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, beautiful combination.
Darkness.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you. So just to introduce Chris as well, although I'm sure many of you are familiar with Chris and his work. He was a journalist before becoming a full-time novelist. And since that debut novel, Quite Ugly One Morning, from 1996, he's developed a body of work comprising of more than 25 publications, mixing comedy, and I love there's so much linkage between what both of you have written, comedy, politics, social comment and action with a strong narrative. And just to pick out some highlights there, that debut novel, Quite Ugly One Morning, was the winner of the Critics' First Blood Award for the Best Crime Fiction Novel of the Year. Then Boiling a Frog, and I just love the title of your work, Chris. You have some amazing, the choice of those. But that novel, Boiling a Frog, won the Sherlock Award for Best Comic Detective in 2000. All Fun and Games Until Someone Loses an Eye was the winner of the 7th Bollinger Everyman Wodehouse Prize for Comic Fiction in 2006. And finally, in 2016, Black Widow won the McIlvenney Prize, previously known as the Scottish Crime Fiction Book of the Year. Chris, it feels like a lifetime of writing, but you were a journalist before you became a full-time, again, a life of writing. I just wonder, when did the shift occur for you to go from journalist to full-time novelist?
I always wanted to write fiction, but it wasn't the kind of thing that, there wasn't an ad in the Guardian when you were graduating to become a novelist, So, I'd worked really mostly on the production side of magazines. I worked for Screen International, which is a cinema trade paper, and I always said journalist, though, even though I was a sub-editor, because nobody actually knew what a sub-editor was. They still tend not to know what a sub-editor is. There's hardly any of them left. That's why there's so many badly written articles in newspapers. So I like the sort of production side of things, the layout and the design. But in my spare time, I was always writing fiction. So I wrote 4 novels before I got one published, before Quite Ugly One Morning was my 4th. And round about then I was working freelance in Edinburgh for the Edinburgh Evening News and the Scotsman, really just so that I could take long swathes of time off to write. You know, what I'd learned was that it was more conducive to writing if you can do nothing but writing for days and weeks at a time, if you're trying to write long form fiction. So I would take off about as much as I could afford, which was about 2 months. So out of each year, so I wrote Quite Ugly One Morning, and actually it was in about 7 weeks. So I made the jump shortly after that because I got a publishing deal in the summer of 1995. And so I haven't really worked as a journalist since then.
Great, thank you for that. So here we are looking at then these novels that you've created, where your characters get taken into unreal or virtual worlds. And before we get into that, I'd just like to say, because we've had the first question up, and we'll take those questions towards the end of our time together. So please, if anybody has questions, please send them in, and Anne will make them available for us, and we can get to grips with those. Alpha Omega and Bedlam and those main characters of Gabriel and Ross. And I just wonder, for anybody who's not familiar with the work, and of course for yourself, Nick, because the novel isn't actually out until July, is that correct?
That's right, yeah, July 21st, yeah.
Yeah, and main characters are so crucial to a novel's, you know, how that goes. So I wonder, Chris, could you tell us about that main protagonist, the development and the character, who that person is?
I suppose that the development of the character is crucial, but is linked to the genesis of the whole project. You know, Bedlam was, I'd just published Pandemonium, and Pandemonium was absolutely full of gaming references. At the start of Pandemonium, in order to help you understand, because a lot of characters are sort of dramatis personae are listed, but they're categorized as if they were gaming clans. And there was video game developers noticed this, they picked up on it. And so it was a company called Red Bedlam down in Brighton got in touch and said, would I be interested in working with them to develop a first-person shooter? And didn't really need to be asked twice because I had such a history with FPS as you can right back to the 90s. And I think initially when I said yes, they might have had some concerns that I was going to develop a Glaswegian first-person shooter. You know, your like first weapon was a half brick. You know,
what would you do? And it's something I would definitely play.
But no, we these big long discussions about our relationship with games and how games had evolved, and I came up with this idea. I suddenly thought, in all these games or in any scenario, somebody had mentioned Tron and the idea of being sucked into a sort of virtual world, and I thought in any such novel or movie, there's the fate of that universe, the fate of that world always turns around the destiny of the protagonist. And I thought, what if you were transported into somewhere like that and you suddenly realized you were irrelevant? You know, you suddenly realized you weren't the center of this. You were actually a grunt that was meant to be gunned down in level 1, you know, of the video game player's experience. And that was just the starting point. So I started thinking about how that might be expanded, and come up with this idea of what if there was this interlinked universe of games. You could escape from one game, but only into another. And that was the starting point for creating the character, essentially. So it had to be about how a character who was reflecting the way his relationship with games had changed down the years. Now, games had played an important part in parts of his life in the same way as pop music and other cultural references might. Kind of in my head, I wanted to write what was like the video game equivalent of high fidelity in that respect.
Beautiful, thank you for that. I like that notion as well of how the moving from the real world and into the game, and the way maybe in the real world you are the one that controls the game as much as anyone can control the game because of the skill that's necessary, but once you become part of the game, any control that you might have had is lost. Or the, you know, the role that you're given to play is not maybe one that you would have chosen. Your main protagonist, Nick, and the world that he's thrown into?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll say first off, actually, Gabriel's one of several main characters. I think I've tried to write something that's a bit more fragmented and has a few different perspectives, like precisely because of that idea of reality being something quite slippery that you need to look at from different perspectives, or reality is something which is created from the perspective of the people who experience it. But yeah, Gabriel, I suppose, is the one who is most plays the biggest part in the game, capital T, capital G. And Alpha Omega is something which is it is a game, but it's the sort of inevitable union of gaming and social media and virtual reality into one sort of experience. And Gabriel is, I mean, he's kind of awful. He's someone who, I mean, he's a teenager who has, he's a sort of incel who has been recently expelled from school and has found himself ostracized by his peers and by his teachers and pretty much everybody apart from his mother, and has found this online world as pretty much the only place where his sort of worldview is not just accepted but validated and reinforced. Because I think one of the driving forces behind Alpha Omega, the game, is that it reinforces your choices in the same way that we're all familiar with from, you know, the YouTube algorithm or whatever other algorithm you choose to mention. So whatever choice he makes, however abhorrent that is rewarded, and he ends up spiraling down this sort of rabbit hole of unpleasantness.
I'm going to take that as the next, as the sort of like the leap into the spiraling unpleasantness. I wonder, has that been your experience with gaming? Chris, you know, the development of the book into a game, but from what I've read about you, gaming has been a part of your life, and you have favourite games. Are you still a keen gamer now?
I haven't really been in the last few years. I mean, I grew up, I was part of the generation that got the first consoles and the first home computers. Like I had a ZX Spectrum, and I wanted to reflect that in Bedlam, you know, that the way video games had become a part of our culture, and how they'd gone from being something that you were actually socially ostracized for your enthusiasm for them when I was younger, to becoming the primary mainstream form of entertainment now. But what intrigued me was watching the culture that started to develop around games. And I was part of that kind of first wave of online gaming in the mid to late 90s, when the sort of gaming clan scene developed in the UK and across Europe. It was mostly driven by Quake 2, Quake 3, and to some extent Unreal Tournament. But there was a subculture that was really fascinating. It was very creative. You know, the thing I didn't like, I never really was a console person, because in the consoles, it's a very passive experience. You're not really encouraged to tinker. And what I loved culturally about the whole kind of Quake culture was it encouraged you to make your own stuff. You know, it was make your own skins for your characters, but make your own maps, create your own mods, you know, tinker with the, you know, open the bonnet and tinker with what's underneath. And that seemed creative. Language evolved from it as well. Slang evolved from it. And that seemed like an exciting moment to me. Obviously, you could look at the ways in which it's transformed into something far more toxic in certain places. But it was an exciting moment culturally. And I actually wrote about it first in A Big Boy Did It and Ran Away, because I wanted to kind of preserve in amber this cultural moment, because I could see that it was going to move on from there. And it was a bit like trying to preserve the sense of what punk was like in the 70s. That's what it felt like. It felt like it was ours. That was the other thing. It didn't feel as corporate as gaming does now. And so I've always felt a kind of affinity with gamers and hackers, you know, that sort of side of it. And I've tried to reflect that in my writing, and particularly in Bedlam, I wanted to reflect the importance of games culturally, but also the dangers of essentially not growing up, of this sort of permanent adolescence that is sometimes a result of a series of games that keep pandering to certain elements of the male id.
It's really difficult though, isn't it? Because if it is an activity that just brings joy and pleasure and excitement, when should there, and is it right that there's a moment to leave those things behind? You know, I'm thinking of St. Paul, you know, and he says, you know, I put away childish things. But especially in, you know, in lockdown life, and there's joy to be had from slipping into another world. Should we really say, I shouldn't be doing this anymore? When does that come?
Interesting you've got the St. Paul quote, because in A Big Boy Did It and Ran Away, my character in that, Raymond Ash, absolutely detests that quote, because essentially he's just become a father, and it reflects choices that have been foisted upon him. And no, I think ironically, the first time I've really played games for any length of time in years has been lockdown, because of that wonderful sense of escape. And who would deny us that just now?
Exactly. Nick, for you, has gaming, has that been like Chris's experience? You know, the growing with the development of the games, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm classically trained as I arrived a little bit after the ZX Spectrum, but yeah, I've definitely. It always gives me the most acute sense of imposter syndrome when I sort of hear other authors talking about how they, you know, spent their formative years closeted away in libraries devouring books, because I'm pretty sure I was just playing Mario Kart for most of the 90s. I've definitely had some pretty fallow periods of reading when I was just playing computer games. But yeah, even now, I mean, I'm in quarantine without my console, but I do play a lot of games, and I've been really excited by just lots of the indie games that have been coming out, which have like really interesting kind of story-driven. Well, actually, more than that. I mean, there's the sort of narrative aspect and the incredibly sophisticated writing that's going on in lots of indie games, but then also almost kind of philosophical aspect. It's interesting that you were talking earlier, Jackie, about the idea of control. Well, you were both talking about, you know, the idea of being put into a game and realizing that you have no agency whatsoever. And I don't know if either of you or anyone listening has played games like Limbo and Inside and games like that really forefront that idea of free will and control, and how much agency you really have, both within a game and outside of a game. But yeah, I mean, I think there are games that I've played, both small and large, recently, that have just blown me away in terms of the sort of sophistication of how they are written and the sorts of things that they engage with. Like and something like Red Dead Redemption 2 was a genuinely sort of epiphanic experience for me. Like, I feel genuinely honoured to be alive in at a time when a piece of art like that is being made and I'm allowed to play it. I almost found, sorry, I will stop talking in a second. I found Red Dead Redemption to be something. Red Dead Redemption was the first time I played a game when I sort of found it slightly frightening how immersed I was in it, and found myself having to play it in sort of hour-long bursts because it was so realistic and engaging, and yeah, there was something slightly terrifying about how much I enjoyed it.
I think it's significant that you're talking about a self-consciousness about having been playing games while other authors love talking about how they fell in love with Balzac when they were 8 years old and bollocks like that. And when actually one of the most influential narrative forms now is gaming. You know, the way in which we tell stories is being influenced by the way in which we experience games.
Yeah.
You've seen it explicitly in novels like Bedlam, but it's there in things like the 7 Lives of Evelyn. Oh dear,
Evelyn Hardcastle.
Hardcastle. I mean, that's a gaming novel. It's about learning the rules of the game. It's about reloading your game, and we're seeing games increasingly influence the way we imagine culture and the way we tell stories.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't just want to keep name dropping games that probably no one has played, but there's a game called What Remains of Edith Finch, which is another sort of indie, kind of almost like a walking simulator. There's not a huge amount of action involved, but it's about a girl exploring the various fates of her siblings and her parents when she returns to her family home. And I played that and just thought that's the kind of novel that I dream of writing. It was so amazingly well paced and it was so moving and so funny. I thought, you know, that's as good as any novel I have read.
Thank you. Now, I was going to save questions till the end, but there's a fabulous question here from Shell Bryson, and it fits in lovely with the discussion as it's going. And Shell says, various streaming services like Twitch are full of folks playing out role-play characters in huge virtual worlds, such as GTA. Some have complex stories, characters and arcs that have been running years, with many thousands of viewers who can influence the art. So how do you, the authors, feel about these new ways of telling and consuming stories? And is this the future?
I mean, I don't spend a huge amount of time on Twitch, but the thing I like about Twitch is how you can sort of make something out of nothing. And I'm constantly amazed by how compelling it is to watch other people play games, because I mean it shouldn't be that interesting. But I can happily lose an hour watching somebody else play a game. It's the same as watching sort of playthroughs on YouTube. But yeah, I mean, I think a sort of a world in which, I think that the world in which you can watch other people playing characters sort of round the clock, I think that sort of thing is only going to get more popular and more prevalent. And especially, I mean, during lockdown, I can think of at least a dozen people who have started Twitch accounts off the back of this. I suppose that's the interesting thing. It's the technology of being able to kind of broadcast your own personal story to a limitless amount of people without having to go through the normal channels of, you know, getting something published or getting something developed.
Yeah,
I think it's a very, very different experience in that there's a freedom that people love about exploring these virtual worlds, exploring games, and essentially creating their own experience or watching someone else create their own experience. But equally, I think people crave narrative, and they crave a constructed, curated narrative. that's what we want from literature, and to some extent it's sometimes what we want in a game. Sometimes you want that open world to explore, but sometimes you want the sense that somebody has thought through everything you're about to do and everything you're about to see. And so when we were creating Bedlam, that was one of the things we thought about, that it's, we'll keep it as an FPS, a first-person shooter, that yes, you're free to explore to some extent, but there had to be a sort of compelling narrative and a certain narrowness of it. It's about creating the illusion that the world is, and the worlds, plural, are boundless. But really, I think the player sometimes wants to know that there's a plot, that there's a particular thing to be discovered. And certainly when you're writing a novel, it's one of the things the reader wants. They want you to have created traps and misdirection and scares and all of that. So there's a lot we can take from it, but I maybe I'm just defending my own corner as an author, but I take pride in constructing a narrative that people can be, you kind of know what experience everyone's going to have. The only sad thing is you can't do the Twitch thing. You can't be there and see that moment when somebody is astonished by the twist you created in your book. That would be fantastic.
I'm thinking as well about, the notion of being able to influence what a writer creates. As we've talked about, choices that gamers can make. And that thing of, would you as authors entertain the notion of showing your scripts as you're going along and asking readers, what would you like to happen to this character? Or what would you like to happen here in the plot? Or as authors, is it very much like your baby and it's your creation?
Well, I think they are sort of two different. I don't think one necessarily has to sort of supplant the other. Going back to the question, I don't think the popularity of Twitch will necessarily, eclipse the novel. Like Chris was saying, I think there's room for both. I really like the idea of a sort of collaborative creation of a story. But at the same time, there are also times when I've got a very, very specific vision and you sort of want to stick to your guns on that. I think there's room for both. As long as you're sort of clear on, you don't want to sort of go into a game of Dungeons and Dragons and not accept any feedback from anybody. Just tell your own story. But I think they're both very sort of valid ways of doing things.
Thank you. Chris, would you?
Absolutely not. This is my world to create. That was one of the pleasures, especially when I was writing Bedlam, was I was able to sort of create these video game worlds as well that were often references or sometimes directly were video games that I'd played. But when I'm writing a novel, it is my opportunity to create my own world. And it's been, I co-write novels with my wife. That's about as far as the collaborative process is going to get for me, and I couldn't allow someone else to decide that they would prefer this to happen to my character than that to happen to. That's something I can just about manage when it's someone that I love and have lived with for decades. But you need a far, far more profound level of intimacy before I'm letting you into that particular picture.
Yeah. I think, I should qualify before people start emailing me telling me what they want to have in my next novel. If it was a sort of forum in which people get together and create stories, which I suppose that's basically what Dungeons and Dragons is, isn't it? But I think in terms of, actually creating a novel, I am pretty precious about how I want it to turn out.
Thank you. We'll have another question here from anonymous attendee. Hello, anonymous. And they ask, so given all these gaming references, what's your opinion on Ready Player One? Book which is between sexist negativity.
I'm sorry, Jackie, you've gone You kind of disappeared on us there.
Am I back? Am I back now? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you think of Ready Player One, but nothing after that? And
okay.
Crucially, whether you're talking about the book or the film.
I'm not sure. This is what the question that I've been given. A book. They're talking about the book. Yeah. So a book which appears to watershed readers between nostalgic happiness and sexist negativity.
I found myself compelled to finish it by virtue of the fact that it's just a classic and openly flagged like quest narrative. It's someone just looking for something over the course of 400 pages. So I sort of felt I couldn't stop reading it, but I also wasn't really enjoying reading it. I didn't really. I thought it was. I thought it was built. It lent too hard on nostalgia, and at the risk of inviting the ire of everybody in the chat, I sort of felt the same thing about Stranger Things, but that's a separate issue. I thought, yeah, I mean, I thought as a novel, yeah, I didn't find it particularly sort of nicely written, or particularly warm to any of the characters. But I think because it was written almost like a game, there was something compelling about just wanting to get kind of to the next level in inverted commas. So yes, it was a strange experience for me actually reading that.
I read it largely on a train going down to Wales, having had so many people after publishing Bedlam, so many people saying, "Oh, have you read Ready Player One?" And I must confess, I thoroughly enjoyed it, but that I am an 80s child, so I was happy to wallow in all of that nostalgia. Similarly with the movie, a lot of people said the movie is very shallow because it is just about nostalgia and about cultural artifacts without creating anything new itself. But I did really enjoy the way it played with all those things. But to come to the point about the sort of sexist arc of it, it does seem very anachronistic in that respect. Or I don't think that was an element of 80s nostalgia that he was pitching for, But interestingly, when we were working with the developers for the Bedlam video game, and we were saying, how do we make this tell a story that's different from the novel whilst bringing the same worlds to life? And it suddenly hit me, change the protagonist and make the protagonist a woman rather than a guy. And it was one of those things that I thought, I wish this had popped into my head a couple of years before when I was writing the book. I think I was thinking from a male point of view about what had been a very male space down the years. The gaming culture had been incredibly male. We had one woman in our Quake clan, and so it never occurred to me. So suddenly I realised when I was creating the character in the video game, you play from the point of view of a woman instead. And there was so many open goals that I had missed when I was writing the novel because of the chance to explore it from a very different perspective, to explore the sexism in the games, the sort of male fantasies in the games, and so it was something I wish I'd done when I was writing the book. And obviously, if I was going back now, that's how I would write it.
I was going to ask you, would you ever consider sort of like a redo?
No, I mean, I did that in the great opportunity to do that with the game, because the game is hours and hours of gameplay, and I was very fortunate in that in bringing the character to life, I had the fantastic vocal talents of Kirsty Strain, who just did an amazing job of creating this absolutely fierce woman who was going to take absolutely no shit from the abusive 14-year-olds that she was encountering online.
Fabulous. And I suppose we should really, I'm aware of time, and we should move to the other side of the equation that was posited in the info about viruses, that topical subject. And just to say, so in Alpha Omega and in Pandemonium, both the novels set in schools, but in both novels there's something not quite right. The school that you created, Nick, is the NutriStart Skills Academy, yeah?
Yes, NSA.
Yeah. Could you give us a little bit of detail and background about this glorious institution? And I just wondered, how much is your own work, shall we say, as a teacher, influence on that institution?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any choice but to get into hot water over this. And thank you for mentioning my school by name as well at the beginning of this. There was absolutely no doubt as to who I'm referring to in the book. But yeah, so the school is a sort of, I mean, well, the whole book, like I was saying, is sort of speculative, kind of satirical look at where schools could kind of end up if they were to continue with certain sort of trajectories that they're currently on. So it's a highly privatized, sort of corporatized school, as a sponsored academy. So NutriStart is a sort of it's a sort of conglomerate that's sort of broadly analogous with something like I don't know, Coca-Cola or Nestle or something like that. So the entire ethos of the school is sort of dictated by the kind of brand values of the sponsor that are paying for everything. So it ends up with kids being sort of inculcated in this, what is quite a kind of corporate world. And it was just something that I sort of worried about whilst I was teaching. And this is, you know, like I say, it's an exaggeration with what's going on in the novel, but the idea, there is this sort of creeping kind of corporate lexicon that is getting used in lots of schools, both private and state, and particularly in academies, where it's just sort of assumed that kids will go on to a career in something that uses that sort of mindset. Interestingly, mindset is one of the words that I have a problem with. So it's just quite, I found it kind of horrifying when I was a form teacher and I was asking my 14-year-olds to identify, this is verbatim, identify leadership opportunities for the coming year. It's pretty hellish. And also there's also something to be said about, I suppose, the kind of the link between the school and the gaming sort of social media aspect things. I think I saw a sort of analogy in the way that schools now go about collecting data about their students, and the way that something like Facebook or Google collects data. And again, that was just something that I found sort of interesting and maybe a little bit worrying, was just how a human child can be reduced to a set of kind of data points. And also, I think I saw an opportunity there for, or I imagined, what if a corporation or something like Facebook saw schools as an opportunity to sort of harvest yet more precious data about not just adults, but also children.
Yeah. Scary stuff, scary stuff. Even you talking about it makes me feel unwell a little bit. The backdrop of the school, though, and again, Chris, for you, it was St. Peter's High School, was it not, where you said Pandemonium?
Yeah, well, it wasn't really taking place in a school. It was a bunch of sort of senior school pupils on a kind of outward bound weekend after a tragedy at the school.
And the notion, though, of that age group, you know, why did you work with that age group?
It opens up a lot of things. You know, it's a point in life where you're on the cusp of adulthood. That was important because it was. I mean, I'd been playing a lot of Doom 3 when I in the early 2000s, and I started writing. Pandemonium was originally written as a screenplay. It was commissioned by a production company, and that was in about 2006. And a few years later, I turned it into the novel, and it kind of. I wanted it to be a sort of a paean to 80s horror movies, you know. So it had, and my vision for it was going to be a bit like the first 40 minutes was going to be like American Pie, and then it was going to turn into your sort of 80s slasher movie. So I wanted the teenagers to be authentic as well. I mean, ironically, at a time when the publishing industry and the bookshops are absolutely swimming with YA fiction, there was some American publishers read Pandemonium and they wouldn't touch it with a bar's pole, and essentially because I was depicting these teenagers behaving like actual teenagers because they were all trying to get pissed and shag each other. And interestingly, with Pandemonium, it's in development for a film now, and it's the same production company as in recent years made Anna and the Apocalypse. But which John McPhail, the director, did an amazing job of. But there was another director, the director who's going to be working on Pandemonium and who's written the script for it. He was at one point in talks to direct Anna and the Apocalypse, and he said it wasn't quite for him. He loved the script, but it wasn't for him. And it was when he was offered the chance to do Pandemonium, which he'd loved the book for years. He said that's when he realised what it was. It was essentially, as he put it, the kids in Pandemonium would kick fuck out the kids in Anna and the Apocalypse. I think it was essentially because I think schools have just got a lot better than they were. I based the kids and the school ethos in Pandemonium on my experience as a teenager. Unfortunately, when my son read Pandemonium, he was saying, God, it's not like this anymore, Dad. You know, it's not quite as brutal as this.
I love that difference though, because Nick, between your saying and the way that school seems to be moving into it, you know, and you know, your son's telling you, Dad, it's just not as bad as it used to be. Interesting perspectives. And do you mind if I ask you a question that I'm burning to ask? And it's that if we, you know, consider the idea that the current circumstances that we're in, if you could leave the real world right now, okay, and I'm not suggesting that what you're experiencing at the moment is unpleasant, where would you immerse yourself right now? What would you do?
Specifically a sort of a game world.
Have I?
You keep popping in and out. I think it's. Let's talk about it. If it is a game world, what game world would you immerse yourself in? Is that what you're getting at, Jackie? Or she's frozen again. So
Yeah.
You go for it, Nick.
I don't know. I mean,
if you need time, I'll
probably say something like something sort of harmless and pleasant, like Lon Lon Ranch from Legends of Zelda, which is basically just a farm. You're quite happy to run around chasing chickens, milking cattle, helping people, you know, find their lost livestock. Which is actually not so different from where I am, what I'm doing currently.
I think I would go to the Wii Sports Resort.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, beautiful.
Because it's always sunny, the water's blue, there's lots of fun things to do. It's very harmless. It looks like a place to be on holiday, essentially. You know, nothing that's going to remind you of all the unpleasantness. I wouldn't want anything that involved too much blowing things up and violence at the moment. So I would want somewhere like the Wii Sports Resort Island where I could just keep fit whilst enjoying some sunshine and some respite.
I love both your answers. I mean, it's like, it's just really chilled and worlds that you're aiming into. From the experience that we're having now, and I know with other authors spoken to about this, will you in future work, do you think you can get away with not talking about lockdown as it is now? Or is it something that you're really excited to maybe include in future writing?
Oh, I'm absolutely not writing about it. Fuck
Mm-hmm.
no, don't write your lockdown novel. You know, it's the kind of boring question that if I'm out and about, you bump into people and they'll say, "Oh, you're going to write a book about lockdown?" No, because nobody wants to relive this once it's over. You know, I think, interestingly, from the perspective of and the context of Cymera, that science fiction is probably the one place where we will be able to explore our feelings and experience of it, because it's at a sufficient remove. You know, it can be done in ways that are parallel rather than, you know, I'm sure somebody will write an amazing sort of domestic noir type novel about lockdown, and we'll all wish we'd written it. But there'll also be hundreds of really, really shit novels that just make you think, I don't want to go back there. I don't want to be reading about all those tedious experiences and not being able to get any flour and all of this. Yeah. So no, I am not writing a lockdown novel.
Totally agree. I'm slightly dreading the raft of coronavirus novels that's inevitably coming in 2021. I mean, also, I think Alpha Omega is sort of a lockdown novel anyway. So I'm slightly dreading, like you say, Chris, like no one's really going to want to revisit this. So I'm slightly, it's getting harder to promote Alpha Omega because it's not a particularly sort of novel concept anymore, like enforced lockdown. But no, I think also as soon as you start writing a novel which is like a take on something, it becomes infinitely more difficult to write a novel that's good. which is kind of what I found with Alpha Omega, is so many times I had to just stop myself from just, you know, giving my hot take on what I think the problems with the education system are, and go back to the story and just write the story. And yeah, I think as soon as it becomes something where you're sort of explicitly trying to give a take on something, it can send it off course.
But Nick, seriously, I don't think anybody who's watching or who comes back and watch this later should be put off at all from getting hold of your book. Seriously, because
it's great. It's not a bad book. It's just, and actually, the lockdown is something quite different from this. I mean, they are physically locked in an impervious school with all of the doors locked against their will.
Yeah, slightly different. And thanks, Shell, who's just commented. Shell's not put off buying it at all, so that is good. Yeah. Doing festivals like this, as we've been doing over the last few months, is this something that is fine for you, or do you miss because I know, Chris, I know you're a great attender of festivals and events. Has it been hard for you not to be things?
Yes. It's a very solitary pursuit most of the time, writing a book, and festivals is the time when you get to meet your pals, your fellow writers, the readers, to get feedback on what people thought of your work. I mean, I just love doing events. I love the sense of occasion and theatre about it all. I mean, I'm particularly missing the fun-loving crime writers. Were supposed to be doing a whole slew of gigs during the spring of this year. All of that. I mean, I just it's the main thing that I'm missing in terms of I'm able to do my job in that I finished a book a few weeks into lockdown, and I'm now, Marissa and I are working hard on the new Ambrose Parry novel, so we can keep all that ticking over. But we both really miss going to festivals, it's probably the one thing we're most looking forward to about hopefully some normality returning.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Nick, for you, is that the case?
Well, this is basically the first festival I've ever done in my life. I can't say, missing it isn't really the word. I was really looking forward to like you say, Chris, like coming and just meeting other writers. On stage with you, it's really amazing. But, so that's a shame. I was also due to to talk at Comic-Con in London, which would have been amazing. But again, that's something that's sort of fallen by the wayside. So it is great to. I agree, Chris. It's great to sort of get out and about and meet other writers and meet other readers, and like school visits. Like from doing my children's books, like I really enjoy going to schools and chatting with kids about what they're reading and getting some authentic and unedited feedback from them. It is. It's tough.
I'm going to pose you one last question, and it's the notion of you can choose from any of your books, but I think if you could choose from either from Alpha Omega or from Bedlam or Pandemonium, we're here in this situation, and you have one of those characters with you. Can be anyone, and it doesn't mean to say either that you have to get rid of people who already are living with you in the house, so you don't have to, wives, kids, friends, it doesn't have to go. Which one of your characters would you be willing to put up with in this situation, and why?
I think almost all of my characters are uniformly terrible people in Alpha Omega. I think maybe with the exception of Alice Nowacki, she's the archaeologist who sort of gets pulled in to investigate a strange artifact which is discovered on the site of the school. She's pretty much the only person who has her head screwed on properly. I think she's probably the only one.
Safest one, probably, to have with you. Yeah. Chris, do you have a one?
As more as like a kind of social experiment, I'd want two characters, actually from Places in the Darkness, of Nikki Freeman, and Alice Blake, because Alice Blake is such a goody two-shoes, and she just observes every rule quite religiously, and Nikki Fix is just a chancer who always finds ways to get round things, to get hold of contraband, so it would just be interesting to watch the power struggle and the moral battle between the two of those if they were forced to share a house under these circumstances.
I think you could get fabulous footage as well for that. Your own big brother sort of house. No. So, Nick, you have a book coming out, Alpha Omega. Yeah. Chris, you also have a recent book, do you not?
Yeah, Fallen Angel came out in paperback shortly before all of this happened. And the new Ambrose Parry hardback came out last September, The Art of Dying.
Fallen Angel, could you just say to us a little bit what Fallen Angel is about?
Doesn't really fall within the SF remit, in that it's about a family on holiday in Portugal. It's largely about the psychology behind conspiracy theories and how we kind of were sort of susceptible to conspiracy theories when we aren't given a satisfactory explanation for something. So it's about a family that are back in Portugal for the first time together for ages because of a tragedy that happened 16 years before, and all of they were a family who were very much in the public eye as a result of this tragedy, and it's about the conspiracy theories that grew up around them. And I was hoping it was going to be a big kind of summer read. People would want to take it on holiday. It's even got a swimming pool on the cover. So it's actually, it's as close as you're going to get to going on holiday to Portugal at the moment.
I think Shell's just come on and commented, given the fact that we'll be going to foreign shows, not get hold of a book like that, and there's also been commented at Cymera, whilst it may focus on certain genre, it's a festival that certainly embraces all. Wesley there saying, yeah, we should all love Chris's books. I totally agree. Well, sadly, I'm really the time up. First of all, thank you to and Mam, unstable again. The connection's unstable. Hopefully I'm back. Thank you. I'm back in the room. Excellent. I keep disappearing down a gaming hole. I can't tell you what the game is. If I told you, I would have to kill you. Thank you everybody for joining us today, or anybody who's going to watch the sessions later. Nick and Chris, thank you so much for your conversation, for explaining and taking us down different avenues, and just wish you both all the very best with the books that are out now. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and I hope to meet you at a real world festival sometime, Nick.
Yes, IRL, that'd be nice.
Yeah. Bye guys. Bye for now.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.